Welcome back, and thanks for joining me again. I want to thank the people that subscribe to listen to my sermon. Um, if you watch this and you enjoy it, please subscribe as well. It just encourages me. It makes me connect with you and know that you guys are interested in hearing more of this. And the more you support me, the more time I could dedicate to investing and finding the truth with you. As always, please feel free to comment. But let's get started. So last episode we read the second paragraph of Genesis, and now we're starting off with the third one. So let's just jump right in. I'll read it first in Hebrew, and in Hebrew it says, "Vayomer Elohim, Yehi O, Vayehi O." Translated into English, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So let's go through the words again. And some of these words we are meeting for the first time. So if we just run through the story of creation, the first two chapters so far, it starts with the beginning of Bereshit created God, or God created in the beginning the sky and the earth. We said it's really open to a few different interpretations. It looks more as if, from a phonetics point of view, that it looks like something created God. And the creation of God itself was a parallel. Basically, the creation of the sky and earth was the creation of God. We then discovered in the second paragraph that earth then was a complete unfocused thing. It was in a complete darkness. Um, and it has a lot of sentences within that just don't make a lot of sense. At least not at this point in our learning. V'ruach Elohim rechevet al pnei hamayim, and the Spirit of God, and we said the Spirit of God was a female, was floating on the surface of the water, which kind of implies to us that God, in some level, is disconnected from the float of nature itself, if it could be hovering within it. But that it is hovering within it, it has like this unclear relationship at this stage between God and the creation, and was God part of the creation, and was the creation part of God? Which I personally have a feeling, a gut feeling, that God and creation are kind of like this, something that you can't say here God starts and here creation ends. I believe that it's such a fluid line that God and creation are, you could say it in one breath, because there isn't a God if there is no creation, even if God existed before, which I think Bereshit created God, so there was some sort of source previous to God as we perceive him. But the perception of God couldn't exist before creation existed. So that's where I'm standing from. And then when we get into the sentences and we're saying that God said, this is the first time that we approach God as almost as a figure. Now, this is a really hard point for me, because on one end, when you go to religious leaders, and you lend from stories in Genesis, and you say, well, God is kind of human-like. He talks, he gets mad, he gets happy, he gets sad. So why can't I approach him and talk to him and treat him as something that is alive, as something that has feelings, as something that I could connect to, as someone that I have a real relationship with. And a lot of times when I get answers from religious leaders, I hear that, oh, these are just hidden stories, and the words themselves don't bear as much meaning as their deeper spiritual meaning. And one of the main reasons why I'm doing this series is because I don't really believe in that excuse, because that is an excuse, even if there are, and I believe that there are hidden gems within the Bible. I believe that if it's written in the Bible literally, it can't be a lie. So if the Bible says, or it's completely false. So if the Bible says, Vayomer Elohim, if the Bible said, and God said, if the Bible says that God is speaking, that means, one, God could speak, and two, God must have a mouth. God must have a way. It doesn't have to be a human mouth. It could be a spiritual mouth. But God has a source of a one way of communicating, and it might be a completely different way of communicating. So when we look at when a man speaks, we say, and I definitely believe in it, that although with our own words, we could create and destroy worlds. Just saying one word could start a war. And on the other hand, one word could save a life. So it could be that we're going into this abstract place where a word of God is more of a creation is a word. That any sort of creation is a word. So although we tend to think that words must come out of our mouths, words could be, or sayings could be, anything we do. When we do something, we say something. When the ancient when the ancient Egyptians created a pyramid, they were out there to say something, and they're still saying it until today. Something about their power and wisdom, and it was said much better than words could ever say. So creation is a type of saying. When you create something, you're actually talking. Not only you're talking in a much longer capacity than we could ever fathom. So if an Egyptian, the pyramids were the originator of the pyramids, created the first pyramid, the first step pyramid, and it exists until today, that means he's still speaking to us. And that's something that I take very, very closely. I believe that everything from the past is still here. We just need to be open and to be able to see it. And in the same level, God is still speaking to us. And some say that the words of creation themselves are still happening. And if we only try to grasp them, we'll be able to see that God is still creating the world. And if he's still creating the world, we have still access to this creation. And we could still have access to God itself. We could visibly, spiritually, and in every other way you could think about, visualize it. Because if a pyramid could stand forever, wouldn't you say that the creation of, galaxies and birds and the sky and the ocean and any other thing that just pops now into your head, aren't those kind of like God's leftovers? Those are God's, more leftovers is such a horrible word for this. Aren't those God's way of speaking? Now, if we're saying that he spoke in the past, but maybe there is something we need to learn from. And that's really where I'm coming from here in the first thoughts about V'omer Elohim, and God said. And when we look later on in future readings, we'll see that God speaks to humans, and they speak back to him. So it must be in a level, or literally God is speaking in a way that we could hear, which I don't really believe in that, because I don't believe that God spoke to people 2,000 years ago and then decided he's going to stop talking to people. All right, so, or God decided to talk only to the righteous and then he left us all to fight off on our own. I don't believe in that, and it's hard to believe in such a way of thinking, because then it doesn't carry much weight. And when I'm looking at it in a place where today, if God were to speak only to one person, we would deem him as a crazy person. If God would physically come and speak to me and tell me to do something, and I would say that to you, you would think I'm insane. You would think that I'm not right. Maybe I'll have a few followers, but I wouldn't say that out loud, even if I knew that God was speaking to me, even if I thought that God was speaking to me. In the culture that we're living in, I wouldn't be able to admit to something like that. So when we're talking about V'omer Elohim, for me it's a very strong, very hard thing to answer, and I don't have a good answer to that. One thing that's interesting though, in the way that it's written for the word itself, and if we start breaking down into the words themselves, the word Vayomer itself is very interestingly said, because if we were going to say that God said in a past tense, we would say Ve'amar, which is past tense. If we wanted to say God is going to say in the future, we're going to say Va'omar, I will say. If we wanted to say that God is saying it right now, we probably would say Vayomer. Although maybe there is no word for saying right now, really, but that's the closest thing that I could think about, that Omer, Ani Omer. Well, it'd probably be Omer. So Vayomer is just not really, and I'm trying to think about a way where I would say it in this type of way. And really, there's no scenario where I could tell a story where I would use the word Vayomer. Um, and we must learn from it something, because really the root of the word is Aleph Mem Resh. Is the you can't mix it up. So the yud here seems extra, and it seems like it's borrowed from that name of God that doesn't exist yet. It kind of also shows that this kind of ambiguous timing. We don't know if he said it. We don't know if he's going to say it. We don't know if he is saying it. So the only conclusion that we could say about this is that it's time. It's happening right now. It happened in the past. It will happen in the future. So if I'm saying Vayomer and I'm treating it in that way, then it seems like this word is more or less saying that God not said, and God said is saying and will say. Okay? So it's kind of like almost, it's a completely different way of saying that someone said something using the same root of the word said. So I just have to say, like, if I was trying to tell someone near me, if I would try to say, there's just no logical explanation to using this context. We see it a lot of times throughout the Bible. So there might be some sort of interesting, deeper meaning to it. But instead of coming to a conclusion, we'll just bring this up as an issue, saying that this is not really something you could say if we were considering that time exists. Now, just because I said that, just popped into my head. Maybe time didn't exist yet. And if time didn't exist yet, then it justifies to say it in a way where time has no relevance. Because when I say Vayomer, it's hard really to say if it's past tense, future, present. It's kind of like a mumbo jumbo. So maybe when I'm saying Vayomer, it's really because before time existed, anything that happened then didn't really happen or always happened. Because you can't say when it started, when it ended. Okay, time doesn't exist yet in paragraph 3 of the Bible. All right? So what does God say? So first of all, we already meant the word God, so we don't have to... I skipped one by mistake. So we said we saw the word God. There's no point in delving deeper into this at this stage. Beyond one point, that Vayomer is male tense. So if we look back again, we'll see that in the last paragraph we had the Ruach Elohim Rechefet. She is floating. The Spirit of God, she is floating upon the water, would be the more accurate translation. But we see that in the next paragraph, now God is a male figure, Vayomer Elohim, and God said. So we could or think about God as something, as an androgynous form of a God that's both male and female at the same time. Because if it's written in the Bible, we can't say that God is not neither, because if God is neither, then the Bible is lying. Right? Because the Bible cannot use words to borrow stuff that are not the truth. So if God is portrayed as a female and then God is portrayed as a male, we have only two ways of looking at it if we're accepting the Bible as the true word of God. One is that God has a few different layers, where some layers he's a female and some layers he's male, which makes a lot of sense. We could say that maybe depending on the types of action that God does, there are different types of usages. So in the level of the initial creation itself, where God was floating, when the Spirit of God was floating on the surface of the water, we could say maybe the Spirit itself was a female, but the Spirit of God is part of God. So, and maybe the importance of saying the Spirit of God, which kind of sounds very unclear, but the Spirit of God itself is a female. She is floating on the surface of the water. And really, why would something, float on the surface of the water? Why would God... it's almost like a Harry Potter story where supposedly God is this something that you could point out and he's floating on the water, or she's floating on the water. Very unclear and very puzzling, this sentence. But we see that God is both a female, or at least his spirit is a female. Well, when he speaks in a male tongue, because Vayomer is in a male form. So whoever is speaking has a male form at this scenario. Now, this is the first point that we meet something that God says something, and his first words are Yehi, which again is almost the full word of the name of God, but it's not, and it's more of a command. It's almost like a futuristic command saying, let it be. Okay, let there be is a really good translation. There's no better translation to it. But interestingly enough, this word doesn't have any substance, and it has only vowels in Hebrew. So you have the yud, you have the hey, you have the yud. All of them are vowels. Interestingly enough, it's a perfect shape, where a perfect word where you have yud, and hey in the middle. So no matter what direction you read it, it's the same thing. All right. And another thing to point here, as we said, is we have 3 out of the 4 letters of God. We're just missing another yud to create. Well, we have 2 out of the 3 actually, and one of them is duplicated twice, more accurately speaking. So we're saying Vayihi, and the word after that. And if we're looking at it already, and let's try to explore it and try to figure out why would the word Yehi be? Why would a command? It's more than a command. It's like an abstract command. Because this is one of those words that would be poetically beautiful, but I would never be able to say on myself that I could say that I could use that. Yehi is it's an action that doesn't involve any work. It's more or less Yehi is almost as saying let there be light is really the best translation of it. Let there be skies. Let there be birds. It's not an action. It's not God saying let there be created. God, it's not a builder. It's not a word of a builder. It's just by saying like I let the light be here. That's probably the best way to translate it. I agree for the light to be here. More or less, God is not saying I'm creating light. If he wanted to, he would say, here you go, I'm creating light. Instead of that, he says, okay, I agree for light to be here. So that's a really interesting thing, that the way of that context. So maybe that's part of that importance why we're only using letters that are glue. They're not building blocks. They're just the glue. These letters alone could create the name of God, and they connect every single word. And to speak in the Hebrew language, you need to use these words all the time. But they're kind of they're not actions. They're not something that you could tangibly catch. It's more or less the thread. It's the thread between words. So it seems very appropriate for a word that basically says, okay, I agree for something to be here, be something that is not actionable. These are letters that are more agreeing letters. All right, so it's very, very interesting. And we move on to the next word, which is O, and that translates into light. And one thing that I really like about this word itself is also its physicality of it. So first of all, you have the first letter of the alphabet, and then the following 2 are almost, the only way for me the only word that pops up in my head is they're kind of like exploratory paths. These are letters that beyond the first letter of the, this is what something very solid. You have 2 feet on the ground. The next one is almost like a straight line to the sky, and depending on how the alphabet looks like in this font, it looks like a bit curved. Sometimes in the alphabet, it just looks like a straight line. So you see this almost like a ray of light. So the Vav is almost like a ray of light where it's a straight line, and the Lesh is very similar to a ray of light, but it almost shows you that even light could be bended, and we know that today, that even light could be bended, which when was written wasn't that common knowledge. So one of the stuff that are kind of beautiful in this creation of light is almost a hint when I'm looking at this, that this is the essence of energy. Because when you look at it, the letter Aleph, if you think about it and Hebrew, a lot of words are of creation start with the word Aleph. If it's Esh, which is fire. If it's Adam, which is human, man. If it's Adam. If it's I'm trying to think of other words right now, but they escape my mind. But I really can't think about words that start with Aleph that aren't stuff that are being created. Adama, ground. So there's a lot of words, including the words that we learned so far in our reading. So if we go back and we search for all the words that start with the letter Aleph, so we go back all the way to the beginning, we see Elohim, creator. Et is a connector word, which encompasses everything. First letter, last letter. Aretz is ground. So, there we go. And that's it. That's all the words that start with Aleph so far. And we could see that the creator, we know that fire is going to use that. We know that the man itself is going to have that letter. So Aleph is a very grounded word. It's more or less a word that takes something that might have been abstract and gives it a pointer. It's one of those letters that anchors you into a position. And usually when you anchor something into position, you have 2 feet. Now, although we're anchoring something that is so abstract, such as the word light, we have to also illustrate some of its qualities. So now that we anchored it and we're treating it as something that we could speak about, because before that there was no way to speak about it, let us say that light is a line. It's a ray. It's a funnel of energy. But with that said, it's not only a funnel of energy that usually goes without any effect. By affecting it, by treating it, we could then direct it. So we could direct energy, we could direct light, because light is beyond light. Light is energy. Light is life force. All right, so, and one of the most powerful things here that we're learning is that God doesn't create the light. That's not what's written here. God is saying, I agree for the light to be here. All right, so it seems like more that God is in this position point in time. God is more he has building blocks and now he's working with them. It almost seems that way. All right, so let's move on to the next point. And basically, after the sentence that God says, the first words that God ever says, and it's surprising that not many people actually remember that by heart, because if you ask people, even religious people, what is the first word that God says, not many would remember it. So the first word that God says is Yehio, which is, at least in our world, the first word ever said. All right? All the stuff that happened before that, and it's kind of, I have to go back there to see that. So we see that in the beginning, God created the sky and the earth, or in the beginning, God was created, and with him, the sky and the earth. The sky and earth are something that's very abstract right now. It could be a lot of things. And we see that the land was in chaos, and the Spirit of God was floating on the water. And the first point where we're actually saying that God is physically creating something, or actually sorting something out, we see that God is sorting out light. And when he sorts out the light, after he says that, immediately after, Vayehi, and then there was light. And again, we see that the usage is the exact same usage of the same word that was before, Yehi and Yehi. Only this time there's a dash in between. Almost like saying that that word itself integrated into the light. That dash feels that way, but it's treating it without looking at it that way. We're kind of seeing this literal obeyment of nature. In other words, God said something, nature did exactly that thing. It didn't do only... ignoring the language barriers, I would think that if I said, God said, let there be chairs, and then chairs were. Or we wouldn't even need to say that. We would say that God said, let there be chairs, and let there be flowers, and let there be gardens. This duplication of saying that when not only let there be, and then there was already, and you can see that the difference between Yehio and Vayehi are literally, there is no difference between the two words, but they have completely different meanings. One word means let there be, and the other one is there is already. And we're using the exact same letters, exact same everything, which is, so basically saying that taking the word Vayehi completely disconnected from anything, we don't know if it means there was already or there is already. And my answer to that is the word itself doesn't have any meaning. Yehi means both let there be and both there was already. So when you're saying we are basically saying, in no other way of saying it, really no other way of saying it, we're saying light was already there, that the wording of God, Yehi is exact same thing as there were just light on its own. That there's no way to disconnect the two. There's no way to move it into two actions. There's no way of saying that God said, let there be light, and then the day after that or immediately after that, light appeared. So one thing that we see from this whole context of this whole sentence, time had no relevance. Time didn't exist, because if I said something, it already happened before I even said it. So when God says there will be light, it's when he just brought that to the surface of saying it, it already happened. I know this is hard to comprehend, but we're digging into this, and this is where we're getting at. And I just want you to say that I don't prepare in advance for these sermons. I look at the word and I try to let God speak to me. And I know we said in the beginning that you're not allowed to say that God speaks to you, because then people will think that you're crazy. I believe that nature and God and the universe itself are trying to communicate with us and trying to help us find light wherever we are, which is so relevant to what we're reading right now. And it's upon us to decide to see light. There's so much evil in the world. There's so much bad in the world. There's so many bad people. There's so many good people that do bad things. There's so many people that think they're good but actively live in a way that hurts others. And that no one comes out of that equation. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with anything. People all over the world, and every single religion and every single spectrum of the universe, create evil. They're one of the bigger creators of evil. They're the creators of good as well. So one of these powerful sentences of saying that, let there be light. Just let the light be there. That's all you have to do to bring good into the world. That's all you need to do to bring light into the world. Just let it be. And I see this as so pivotal and so important that the third sentence in the Bible, the first thing that God ever says is not, do whatever I want, and when I create humans, I'll control you. No, the first thing that God says is, let there be light. Not, I'm going to create now light. He's not taking it. He's not boasting and saying, I'm the creator of light. He's saying, let there be light. So I hope out of this sermon and out of this episode, maybe you'll take it upon yourself to rethink about how you look at good, how you look at light, how do you look at light is not about forcing light on others. Light is not about forcing your opinions on others. Light is not about anything you think it's about. Light is about enabling good to happen. Light is about not being an obstacle in the path of goodness. Light is not about you trying to force goodness on others. Light is not you forcefully doing something. Light is you physically, emotionally, spiritually, in every single level, recreate that moment of creation of God where God said, let there be light. So I in those words, I'll finish this week's sermon, and I encourage you to open up your hearts and your minds and your everything in yourself to be enablers, to be part of it as it's happening, not to be bystanders, not to be objectors, to see good, and when you see something that is a good thing, to embrace it and be part of it, not turn into the forces of good, not to be the forces of evil, to take yourself and become part of that light, become part of that thing. As soon as you become part of it, you created it, you just did the first godly thing and the first spiritual idea that the Bible portrays.